45.
Looks like Todd Duncan.
Sounds like, must be a duck.
Jersey girls are the best.
Yeah.
What?
The bunny ears are back. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Laugh Underneath the Podcast. And man, look at this. We are moving on up. JP, I know you had a big hand in putting this little studio together for us. We've been working on this studio so we can have in-person guests come in and talk to us one-on-one. The Laugh Underneath Podcast, obviously, we're always growing and looking to expand. And this is our version of our next level podcasting. So it's kind of cool. I'm excited about it, right? I know I don't look excited because I'm exhausted. But other than that, I'm okay. I have a very cool guest on the show with us. I'll get into the history of how I met this individual. It's pretty fascinating. But his name is Farhad Chowdhury. Farhad, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. He is the founder of ViaNova. Is that right?
That's correct.
Founded in 2018, and it's kind of interesting what they're doing. They're using remote AI. Now, Farhad, you can probably explain this a whole lot better than I can, right?
Yeah, yes, I hope so.
I hope so, because you're the founder of it. Well, you would think of something one day.
Maybe. Yep, exactly.
What exactly does ViaNova do?
So we're basically in the space right now. It's like remote patient monitoring. So you have a lot of patients that have what's called chronic diseases. We put devices in their home, whether they're like blood pressure cuffs or continuous glucose monitors or weight scales, and inside is a 4G cellular chip. And these are FDA approved devices, and the data, as soon as they use it, shoots into our secure cloud. And then we have a full monitoring team of nurses, and it's led by a physician, and we check on these patients. Now we do this to help docs like cardiologists and endocrinologists, but our AI is doing something we call augmented intelligence, and that's like telling the nursing staff or the clinical staff what they should ask, what they should recommend. We don't let the AI directly tell the patient what to do. Instead, the AI is suggesting to someone to review and then make that. And we think that's the future of AI in healthcare, at least until we fully sell our soul to AI.
Right. Robotic nurses and robotic doctors and stuff like that, right?
Correct.
That's got to be the next generation of AI in the healthcare, I would think.
It's already partially here. And so the other hat I have is I'm also now the founder of the Entrepreneur in Residence program at George Mason University.
Okay.
And we're putting together a $250 million digital innovation center.
Jeez.
It'll be up by the end of this year. And in it is a robotics lab, a VR lab, a robot assembly, network assembly, drone technology. And I kind of wanted to make sure digital health was in there, biohealth was in there. We're even looking at creating a phase 1 clinical research facility. So when we're talking about robots, we really are talking about robots.
Wow. Wow. So look, a lot of listeners on this show are like, Bob, you do mortgages and real estate talk, marketing talk. Why do you got Farhad on? He was talking about AI, robotics, and healthcare, right? So guys, I met Farhad during one of our, what's the right way to say that? Make Space, right? Which is not a mosque yet, but it's like an Islamic place. I don't know what it is. Is it a mosque?
We call it a third space.
Third space. Okay. Yeah, I like it. Yeah. So it's where I go do my Friday prayers. And I love this. I love the place just because of the openness and the inclusivity and open ideas and free ideas. I love that. And Farhad comes in every now and then, talks to all of us. And I was listening to his talk several times. It was just so intriguing. He was talking about habits. And as the listeners of the show know, I mean, we've had neuroscientists on this show. We've had psychologists on this show. We've had all sorts of people talking about habits. And I remember you brought up the book Atomic Habits.
Correct.
And I went and got it after that. And I started getting into it. I was like, whoa, this is like I've already been down this path.
Yeah.
And so obviously I want to talk about habits because as salespeople, we develop good habits and we develop bad habits.
Correct.
Right? So let's define just for the audience's sake, what is a good habit versus what's a bad habit?
Well, I mean, generally good and bad is subjective, but what we're talking about are consequences from a repetitive behavior. And my background, because of my healthcare AI stuff, we were giving, it's kind of, I want to talk about where this goes.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with chronic disease patients. Chronic disease patients are 80% of the healthcare cost. So those are the ones whose disease is ongoing, diabetes, hypertension, etc. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, we're handing out devices. We were doing this for years, and still the patients wouldn't use the device. And then we went deeper and we were like, oh, whatever the doc does this data point, that 50% of what doctors give to patients after 30 days, they stop, they drop doing it. Even if they're coming out of a dangerous situation.
Wow.
50% of patients stop. So we were like, oh, and my thesis now is healthcare is a habit problem.
Wow.
And so here I am, a tech guy, and I go, you know what? And I get obsessed. And I start doing this thesis. And I say, this is my opinion, this is changing the narrative.
Yeah.
And I go fly out to Stanford and I meet with Dr. BJ Fogg and I sign up to his boot camp. And he writes the book Tiny Habits. And the book Atomic Habits is actually written by a Wall Street journalist.
Yeah, clear.
He's not a scientist.
Right.
He actually takes all the research from Dr. BJ Fogg out of Stanford, who creates the Stanford Behavior Design Lab. He's the creator of that lab.
Okay.
And I'm like, I need to learn from the horse's mouth.
Got it.
So I become certified in behavior science. I become a certified habit coach.
Okay.
All under the Fogg curriculum. But what James Clear does is he takes it and he packages it and it takes off. And now it's more read than the Bible or more, on Amazon. It's the most sold book in the history of Amazon. So there's definitely something there, but I still think there's a massive gap between that and how it hits. So basically, a good habit leads to good positive consequences and results. And bad habits obviously don't lead to that. A lot of times, good habits may be intentional, and many times bad habits are unintentional. And I think they're not opposites, because bad habits slip one further level, one layer further. A bad habit turns into an addiction.
Oh, yeah, we talked about this. That's right. Okay.
Right. And so by learning about how do you develop good habits about patients and being obsessed, and I'm doing this because my dad's a liver transplant,
right,
diabetic, and his bad habits led to his diabetes, and his bad habits were killing him.
Yeah.
So I'm now being obsessed about this. And I'm sitting back and looking at it and say, and then I start discovering patterns on addiction. And people really haven't correlated the relationship between habit development and then what leads to addiction development.
Yeah, let me ask you something though. The 50% of patients like who don't follow the doctor's advice, right?
Yeah.
So let's just take a diabetic one is the most easiest one to take. And I mean, I have a brother-in-law that's, I mean, you know, I think he listens to the podcast every now and then. He'll probably hear this. And every now and then, like, he'll eat a slice of cake. And he'll say something like, no, I'll pay the price for it tomorrow morning.
Right.
I mean, is that what you're talking about? Like that, like they know that this is bad for them, but it's their habit to have birthday cake at their granddaughter's birthday to celebrate a birthday. So that habit is so instilled that he can't help but have the slice of cake?
Yeah, I mean, I look at like this, how do you want to look at it? It's like habit at the end of the day is like, think about a cable in the brain. And some cables are thick. And the thicker, the more that you do something, it's actually like literally something goes through
like
that
neuroplasticity.
wire, and it gets thickened to the point where that cable is so thick, and then it becomes automatic, right? So that a habit is when I don't need an external trigger really to get me to go do it. Like I don't need an external trigger to make me brush my teeth in the morning.
Yeah.
Right.
But Clear talks about this where he says that and I just read this book like maybe 3 weeks ago, so I'm not an expert on this book, right? But I've been.
But you're more up to date than I am.
No, but I've been reading it like nonstop, right? Because I just love. Sometimes when I get into a book, I just dive into it. But he talks about how habit was formed by the body, and we talked about this one time, where to change the brain has to expend calories, and the brain's main mechanism is to preserve calories.
Yes.
So whenever we're changing a habit, the brain is screaming, "Don't do this, Fob. You're going to regret this in the morning."
That's exactly it. I 100% agree with that. I have a thing that I've been writing about, and if one day a book will come out, and the book's title is Start, Stick, Stretch. So that's the habit sequence. So if you really think about it, and this is where it all starts, like I struggle to develop my own habits, and I know I have certain addictive tendencies, and then I deal with people with that. And so I'm trying to change, and it's exactly what you're saying. And I was like, so I started arguing that the hardest part is the start.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the heart of the start, which is why he makes it atomic. Because the smaller it is, the easier start. But there's so much about the start inertia, which is your point, is like our bodies don't want to change. That's why it's hard to start something new.
Yeah.
But we could get it to high.
Yeah. No, I want to get into this because look, I mean, habits are look, we are going through a very tough mortgage cycle. So think about this, okay? I mean, talk about habits, right? So 2020, 2021, we had the most historical lowest rates, right? Ever, like, I don't know, like ever since at least for 30 years that I've been in the mortgage business and probably longer than that, right? 2.5%, 3% rates. The habits were so quickly formed.
Correct.
I mean, it was like overnight, we were used to just selling 3%. We expected a 3% rate.
Right.
The consumer expected a 3% rate. In fact, they were saying, do you think it'll go any lower?
Right.
And like, well, what's the difference between 2.75 and 3%? Just take 3%, right? But it's another story. When the market went up and the habit was no longer being fed, that's when all of a sudden you're like a detox.
Correct.
Right? Like almost like to your point, the addict, and now we're detoxing. And it's like, oh my God. And so believe it or not, 60% of mortgage loan officers did not renew their license last year.
I believe it.
40% are left as of right now, 40% for year over year, because the addiction was so bad to low rates that it just couldn't get fed.
Right.
So I guess the question here is, how do we teach new habits when we've developed bad habits?
I think this is probably the hardest thing, is like we live in a society that is making it easier and easier to get addicted to bad stuff. And we reward what I call the crack dealers today, right? We reward the Coca-Colas, we reward the Nestle's, we reward the TikToks, we reward, there's a handful of companies, and I even think Wall Street bets on the companies that prove consumption without control, and now cradle to grave consumption.
Oh, wow.
So it's big food,
yeah,
and big pharma,
yeah,
and they've smashed medicine. And this is part of what I learned the hard way in healthcare. The doctors are getting beat up bad because big food is making us sick, and then big pharma wants to just drug us up, and they just want the docs to just stamp along the way. And as we have big enterprises coming out, big money, or Wall Street, we don't call it big money, we call it Wall Street, they made us addicted to bad financial habits because liquidity was so easy, right? So there's we don't learn restraint as a culture unless we get punched in the face. We got punched in the face, and this we doled out, with all this quantitative easing, QE2 stuff. But now we're feeling this is what's happening. That's why the mortgage industry is the way that is, because if we didn't dole out free money to people, would we have high inflation? Would we have to correct with the rates? So
So it's interesting because to me, the way I look at it is when Wall Street, and I don't want to pick on Wall Street or big pharma or whatever, they're, to me, big pharma and the food companies are just the worst crack dealers in America right now.
Right.
I could do a whole 6-week episode on that, right? Or series on that. But I mean, the addiction that we have right now as a nation, or even as a world, because I think it's everywhere. Like I was home in Pakistan in December, and you can see the same lifestyle, like the cravings. You know what I mean? It's not the same Pakistan it was when I was growing up there as a kid.
Right.
And so to me, what I wonder is where does it all end up then if we can't correct our bad behavior? I mean, you're studying behaviors, you're studying habits, right? So if someone can't correct their bad habit, and I'm just using a singular, not as a nation, right? But obviously the pattern could be the same. What happens nationwide then?
I think that's why nations decline. And I think that's what makes nations fall. And at the end of the day, there's a culture that leads, and I think I'll put it in these terms. It's an extreme that takes you over the edge. And there's the extreme that breaks a country. And sometimes I look at like Soviet Union or communism. It was an extreme, like you're not allowed to believe in God. And then they were very extreme. You're not allowed to own anything. And the more extreme humans are in anything, and that's the point. It's not about, I'm not talking about God or atheism, but when we become excessive in one thing, you tip and it could break. And that's happened it can happen at an individual level. That's what happens with addiction, right? You're imbalanced on that addiction, and then the rest of you starts caving.
Yeah.
And I think we're hypersexual, we're hyper materialistic, we're hyper individualistic. These are the three hypers that I've been focusing on personally here in where we are today in 2024. And they're leading to breaking. What the mental health is on the skyrise and all of that. If you look at the core, and in a weird way, it's because we actually overvalue individualism.
Yeah.
We overvalue materialism. And we turned sex into like, we almost glorified it too much. Like
It's like you get rewarded for your sexual deviances.
yeah,
There's a reward to set up to all these bad behaviors. Instead of being looked down upon, it's almost like it's like applauded.
yeah, like everything, like every movie you watch on Netflix, right? Like I was telling somebody, like it's a burger, but when you put 15 cameras and deep shots and this and that, you make a burger like, oh my god, like you glorify it. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why we have gluttony and like all these. I'm like, why do we have so many food shows now? Because we'll take every indulgence and we overhype it.
I was thinking that the other day. I was actually, it's funny. There was a barbecue contest cooking show or something. I was watching it. I think I was on the 4th episode. I was like, what am I doing? I just spent 4 hours of my life that I'll never get back watching some people make barbecue that I'll never eat.
Correct.
But it got me hooked because I was so interested in how they're going to slice something or make something out of possum meat or whatever they were like being tossed in the wilderness. You know what I mean?
I agree. I think that's exactly it. I think that's exactly like, why are we over praising consumption?
Right.
Right. These are different forms of consumption. We look at sex as just consumption.
Right.
We look at food and consumption. And after a while, it's like, we're not happy. We as America, are we happy? Because I believe there's a direct correlation with balance and happiness.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a happy nation, that's for sure. That's the unfortunate part because by all means, we should be the happiest nation on the planet, but we're falling short on that, and that's once again, there's so many different topics. When we talk about addiction, and you mentioned this one time when I was hearing your talks, you're talking about how a kid starts off with Nintendo, the pattern is based, then he goes to his internet, and then the habit is based. Then from the internet, he goes to the cell phone. The habit is, and then so on and so on until drugs and rehabs. Each one individually is not a bad thing, you said. And I thought that was a very poignant fact. Like, there's nothing wrong with having an iPhone.
None.
It's just the pattern and the excessive use of it. So talk about that for a second.
So this is where, when we talk about habits, we're talking about the brain. When we're talking about the brain, we're talking about dopamine. And dopamine has this ability to wire you up where your brain is constantly seeking dopamine. So when you give a kid an iPad at 2 years old, what you're training the dopaminergic function of the brain at that point for the child is constantly seek the hit. And the second the hit ends, get another hit. And what's amazing when you start studying, like Dr. Demke, who's out of Stanford, some of the work that she's done on dopamine and the brain, it's dopamine creates like a surge up. And there are different scores that they give different things, and you get to surge up. And when the dopamine ends, the brain wants to be at equilibrium. It goes below. When it goes below, you're actually feeling depression.
Right.
So after the high of something, it goes. If it's called, there's cheap dopamine, and there's good dopamine, and the cheap dopamine leads to immediate depression.
Wow.
So now, what do you want to do?
Wow.
You want another hit. So now you get more hits and more hits and more hits. So you're constantly building up. But at some point, when you drop, you go into a negative spin.
So that's like when my son was 7, 8 years old, and we'd like somebody who'd do something wrong, and you take his Nintendo away, and he'd be like, "There's nothing to do in my life. I'm depressed. I'm sad." Whatever. Right?
The brain is trying to recalibrate. And so what happens is I see these kids all the time. The iPad, Look at the 2-year-old iPad kids. Then I got to the point where they can't eat without an iPad. So I have family members who the kid is like, it's time to feed the child. They like bring the iPad out. I'm
Oh,
like, why?
wow.
So what's happening? Food is a dopamine, and the iPad is a dopamine. And then I was thinking about myself. My biggest fight with my wife early on is, she was like, why does the TV always have to be on for dinner? I was like,
Yeah.
I can't watch dinner without a television. I didn't know why. I grew up with, not the third parent was the television. The first parent was the television, right? We grew up in chaos. Right?
Yeah.
So I couldn't eat without the TV because, and then I realized later, you want two dopaminergic things to occur at once.
Wow.
Have you ever noticed that the people who smoke always drink coffee with the cigarette?
Yeah.
So then I started looking into coffee. Coffee actually doesn't create dopamine. What coffee does is it expands the part of the brain that gets the salt when the dopamine is happening. So you get double the dopamine hit.
Wow.
So when you smoke, they scored it as like a 1.5 or a 2. But when you do it with coffee, it becomes a 3.
Jesus.
So now you start looking at human behavior, and you're like, whoa, all we're doing is a lot of times is chasing
So hold
different
on, let's
types
go
of
back.
dopamine.
I have friends who say, I don't smoke cigarettes unless I'm drinking alcohol. Right? Not coffee, but they're like, once I get a few drinks in me, then I have a few cigarettes.
Exactly.
So that's the connection there.
Sex and cigarettes.
Yeah. Everything comes back to sex with you, Farhad. I'm starting to wonder about you, man. Well, I got to introduce you to my meditation coach.
I talk about sex because sex has like a 3 on the dopamine score.
Uh-huh.
But on top of that, it's that in this area, I've had to work with people who went to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Got it.
And then Sexaholics Anonymous.
Right.
And then love sex and love alcohol anonymous, right? So yeah, I just think that we are predisposed with certain things that make us addictive, and it's just good for us to know. So it's a great example.
Now, all these things, so this is the one thing that I've always said about habits. All these are God-given like instincts.
Yes.
None of these instincts were like fabricated within me.
Correct.
Right? So the question comes down to is that we're just is excessive use of it? Or is it the demand we're just demanding more than is rightly due to us? I mean, what is it then with these bad habits?
There's a lot of ways to look at it, but like one way is evolutionary biology. So it's kind of like our bodies were designed very differently than the way we live now. So I'll give you a great example. We used to live mostly in famine, and a short amount of the day used to feast. So it was really like 16 hours, 18, 20 hours. And now the body was designed that all of a sudden, if there was access to food, to consume as much as you can, and it's fat storage. So you take that evolutionary biology over a million of years, and that's why we're all obese, because you gave us access and we're disposed to that. They looked at the same thing with sex again, and they said the male wants to spread his seed, and he wouldn't have access to, let's say, have sex. But then all of a sudden you give him access, he's going to want to spread his seed as much as possible because that's part of the spread. So dopamine is associated with survival.
Oh.
And dopamine is associated with the spread of the species. And it's an anticipatory chemical release. We don't live like what we for millions of years.
Right.
And I think, with God, in all the faiths, tells humans to pull back on things that have addictive elements to them.
Sure.
And it's something over the years that I was able to see within any divine tradition. It's like, why does he speak about be careful how much you indulge in sex?
Yeah.
How much you indulge in gluttony. Don't indulge. It's like, wait, these things have the potential to make you lose control.
Well, I mean, Christianity has like the 7 sins, and gluttony is one of them, you know what I mean? And lust is another one, and so on and so on. So clearly, all religious beliefs have that. Even spiritual beliefs, when you study like Buddhism,
all of them,
you realize that it's about moderation, it's about balance. It's about, this whole thing of not overdoing anything. But coming back to 2024, when you do have these bad habits, how could someone work on relief? Like I know for certain, some people have these habits and they're like, well, this is just the way it is. I'll never get rid of it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends because look, I'm in the older bracket, I'm 50 plus, right? And they're like, this way, I can't ever quit smoking cigarettes. And they're just giving up. How does someone get around that mind frame of like absolute defeat and just I don't want to do this?
So forming habits is different than breaking.
Mhm.
Breaking is tough, and I've sit with Dr. Fogg, and even Dr. Fogg at times was like, they have not figured it out. So I'm gonna start with we haven't figured it out.
Okay.
And then, but I will start with this. I've come with a theory personally that that you want to start changing your behavior, and I called it start, stick, stretch. First, you want to start something new. You need a certain amount of energy. Then and only then can you stick to it. And then you stretch it, meaning people come on day one and they're like, I'm going to run a mile every day. You're like, bro, start with putting on your sneakers.
Right.
And this is a great quote by Ed Lattimore. He said, I'm going to ask you this. What's the heaviest weight in the gym?
Heaviest weight? I mean, in my head was the same as golf. It's that weight between my two ears. In golf, they say the longest drive is between your two ears.
Yeah. So the heaviest weight in the gym, and this guy, his quote was, "It's the front door."
There you go. Yeah.
And in James Clear's book, going back to what you say about Atomic Habits, one of his best use cases is a guy that for 6 months would just drive up to the gym, walk in the front door, and leave after 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he did that for 6 months. And then 10 years later, he just started losing the weight. His goal was to walk in. He celebrated walking in, and he just won the start.
Yeah.
So that's why I call it start. Master the start. It's the heart of the start. It's the art of the start. It's all about the start.
Yeah.
Then you stick.
Wow.
Don't stretch. Do not, like, I used to go to the gym every once a year. Then I'd show up and I'd run 3 miles that day, and I'm doing 100, and I'm doing 5 machines, and I'm like, wait, but I didn't come back again.
Yeah.
Because I'm stretching on the first day. I'm trying to master stretch, and I haven't mastered start. So that's just building. Now let me go back. I hope I'm trying to answer your question.
No, I mean, I think we could just dive even deeper into start, but go for it. I mean, yeah.
When it comes to break, I was like on the top layer, start, stick, stretch. Imagine this is how you change behavior. But then I found as I dug deeper, there was this middle layer that no one paid attention to. And a lot of us think it's about time. It's not time. It's not about time, because when you tell somebody, I want you to change behavior, they're like, I ain't got the time for that. It's not time. And I've been spending a lot of time. It's space. And I'll explain what I mean. They showed recently, there's a book by Katie Milkman, that people start changing behavior when something new happens. They move into a new house. They move to a new city. They just get married. They'll wait until some big event occurs before they'll start changing their diet or their. And she goes, there's actually at the start of the new year, this mental thing, right? Because in your mind, I have no emotional space to start something new. And I think what I'm realizing is all of us wake up in the morning saying, I only got a certain amount of emotion or space or energy. And so as an example, right, like I'm giving some to my wife, I'm giving some to my kids, I'm giving some to my work. And somebody comes up to you and they ask you, can you do this for me? And you're like, it's not that you don't have the time. It's like, there's so much energy. Like, how am I going to feel about that? How are you going to feel about it? And I don't think people are paying attention to that. Things have emotional energy. So what happens is bad habits.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Bad habits or addictions are great coping mechanisms. Why do you smoke? Why does someone look at porn? Why does someone play video games to shut off? Why does someone have to go and drink at this particular time? Right? Because it's a coping mechanism to relax. And now you're asking someone to change that. So one thing is to understand, you have to go deeper to understand, why is that a coping mechanism? Number one. And then number two, you need to create space, emotional space in people to take on something new or to break something old.
So I want to go back to the emotional thing real quick. Let's say, because we are still talking about Laugh, Learn, and Eat, right, which is a mortgage podcast and realty, right?
Yeah.
So when you said that, I said to myself, hold on. When I'm calling up recruits, hey, come work for Homecoming's Mortgage, you know? Oh, yeah, let me get back to you. And then no response, right? They set up an appointment, they don't show up. Is it because it's just so emotionally hard for them to say, no, I don't want to make a move?
Yep.
Is that what it is?
It's conflict avoidance.
Oh my God, that's crazy, man.
It's all about emotion.
Really?
I think it's all about emotion. I think what drives it is emotion. What defines us is emotion, and we intuitively know we only have a certain amount of energy in us,
Wow.
and we're kind of nervous about who to give it to and how to hand it out. So that's why we know what's convenient. And so, like going to the gym, if you go into a gym and there's a bunch of other people there who are way better than you, you're the loser of the gym. It takes an emotional toll. You don't want to go back to the gym. You might go to a gym and you're the best guy in shape. You're like, I love coming. There's no tone there.
Yeah, that makes so we look for our own tribe. Is that a good way to say it?
Or we try to I think we're not calculating what's taking up space here. It's never, like space time. Now we realize that's the fourth dimension. Like, it's even real. We have a certain amount of cognitive space and a certain amount of emotional space. So for me, like I couldn't change this behavior. I got stuck. I have a coach. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m., I talk to my coach. He's the greatest coach. I call him the GOAT. And my wife's a therapist, right? And I study behavior change. And as I work through these things inside of myself, all of a sudden space starts opening up. And now I'm taking on something. Now I'm like, what do I do? Take on the next thing. Sometimes a fear can grow out of control and take up so much space that when someone comes up to you and goes, hey, let's start going to the gym or let's walk every day, you're like, oh, I'm so full. You want me to add something else? You want me to start something new? That's what I mean by emotional space.
Yeah.
People feel filled up.
No, I think it's just, look, I'm trying to relate this to the salespeople, right? Because this is what we're dealing with when you're trying to get a new realtor to give you business. Or when you're trying to get if you're a realtor and you're trying to get a new listing,
right.
And the guy says, but I have a 3% rate for the next 26 years. Why do I want to sell my house?
Right.
Right? Exactly. Emotional attachment to that 3%, right?
Correct.
Even though, the house is so small, right? And you got two new kids or whatever, and you got a third one coming, right. And you can't, but the 3% rate is just so emotionally attractive that you just don't want to give it up.
Correct.
So as salespeople, we kind of have to find that emotional way to kind of detach somebody else. Is that what you're saying?
I think you got to find out how, whatever you're offering them, how does that make them feel like you create space? Like a lot of times we sell convenience, right? If you're breaking convenience, which is what you're doing here, then what are they getting out of it that's greater than the convenience?
Got it. Yeah.
Can you package what you're giving to them to be greater than the convenience? Now, I always say this, you could use fear for short term, but you got to use positivity for long term.
Yeah.
So what are you offering that breaks that convenience? That's greater than that convenience. Is it that they get a bunch of cash up front right now and they could acquire another home?
Yeah. I mean, I think look, I mean, there's also, I'm not a huge fear monger when it comes to selling. That's never been my tactic.
Right.
So I mean, I'm always the logical guy. So I've always avoided emotion.
Right.
You know what I mean? I feel like if I show you the facts, and then I feel like you as a consumer should be able to make the right decision for you and your family.
Right.
It's not always worked well, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're telling me, hey, you missed the whole emotional part of it, right?
I mean, I just like, how much space do they have to take on what you're asking? That's my question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, when I look at my own life and I say, okay, because I love breaking habits. So when I hear about your Atomic Habits, and you know what I mean, I've done other books. I read obviously a ton of books, right, throughout the year. Just what we do. But even reading a book was a habit that you had to form.
Right.
Because somewhere along that way, reading that book was releasing dopamine inside of me, where I don't know about you, but sometimes I read a book and I can't read more than 15 minutes of it because my head is exploding.
Same.
Right? I was like, oh my God, it's like too much. It's like dopamine overkill.
Yeah. Or I'm trying to use it right now in 100 different ways, and then I feel guilty that I didn't apply it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I mean, there's so much to cover with habits because look, I mean, one of the things that just hit me the other day, and I think it was the Atomic Habits book actually, right? And because I walk my dog every morning, we walk 2.5, 3 miles every day, right? And I record this like a thing that then we post on LinkedIn, and it's a really cool thing. One of the things I was thinking about doing was even baby steps are moving you in the right direction.
Right.
So back to your the doctor in San Francisco, Stanford,
Yeah.
right?
Tiny habits. That's
Tiny
exactly-
habits, right? I mean, baby steps. It's the little things. So let's not get overwhelmed. It's opening the door of the gym,
Correct.
right?
That's
It's
the
actually
game.
driving to the gym could actually be the first
That's
step,
not exactly.
right? We don't know. Maybe the guy came to the parking lot for the first 2 weeks, then before he opened up the gym door.
That's exactly. No, that's exactly. And there's a lot of tricks around starting, but one of the things this might be useful, like out of Katie Milkman's work, is timing. Like you're thinking about, you have all these potential customers. Imagine when does emotional space open up so that they have the opening for them to hear your pitch, and that's what I find interesting. There's data. So let's say you approach them right after the kids graduated, or right after they transition jobs, or right as soon as they've something happened to the home, the beginning of the year, you'll actually have a higher sales success rate because people in their mind have the space to listen. So looking for those windows is key.
Yeah. So back to
I try to sell to docs and they have no space, never. And it's trying to identify those windows to get them to listen that translates to a transaction.
that's why like the gym memberships, they're always coming up at the first of the year,
Correct.
right? I remember when I used to go to Gold's Gym, and we always used to call them like the winter crop. Like between January 1st and about April 4th, they have the most people in the gym in the morning. And then come April, it would go back down to the normal people.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
Just have to wait them out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's when they move, they'll maybe sign up to the gym, when they start a new job. It's some marker in the brain.
Yeah. What, like in your personal life, right? If you can share this, where have you found your greatest success in creating habits that has fulfilled you?
I think for me, it's like I'm trying to balance. And I think in a lot of ways, I believe in balance, but I was like, there should be a new, like, not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for me, it's balance, growth, and the pursuit of purpose.
Mm.
I think this should, like, it's 2024. We don't need something from 1776, right? So you want to balance and you want to grow. But like for me, I have these small things that have been accumulating. And a lot of it is kind of just, let's say I do something that I'll immediately do push-ups after I do something else. So the anchoring habits. And they've really been, some of them, I've been doing them for like 5-6 years now, consistently every single day.
Mm.
Right? I do a certain amount of squats after I do something every single day, hell or high water.
Mm-hmm.
That happens. And now I learned something about myself. Like recently, my wife got me into this thing called Hot Works. It's like a sauna mixed with the exercise thing. And I realized that I need what's called social activation on habits that are difficult for me.
Mm.
And what I call social activation is like energy. Like talking to you is giving me energy. You provide, you're extrovert, you have energy. Now imagine I know this thing is something that I exceptionally have difficult. I need a social partner to get me started, to just get me to walk through that door of the gym. My wife is a great partner to just get me to walk in. After I walk in, I won't leave it. I'll work out, all this stuff. But I know myself well enough when I need social activation and when I don't. So those are things. Another stuff is decision fatigue. So I only eat at a couple of places. As much as I can, I'll be like, it's Silver Diner, it's Panera Bread, and I know what I'm eating there, right? I'm trying to, now it's Mom's, right? They have the salads there. I try to go to Northside Social and eat the salad there. I try to reduce my decision fatigue in a lot of things. Like I stopped all types of soda. So I started cutting things out of my life. Little by little by little by little. And so it's adding up. It's adding up. And it's like, I could feel that I have more energy, I have more time, I have more space.
Yeah.
My latest habit that you're watching is I realized I love content. And I was dying inside. And I didn't know that. And it took Make Space, gave me the outlet to write and to speak again.
Nice.
And now it went from once a month to once every 2 weeks to like I'm doing a double header this Friday.
Nice.
And I was like, I'm just doing it for me.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it for the crowd. I'm not. And so that's my latest habit. And I noticed because of that habit, it has a like answer, like it has a cascading of good effects on other things.
Mhm.
The other one I do is I live in the park. I back into Lake Akaty.
Okay.
So I just walk in the park, right? I have a Fitbit on, right? I'm trying to do my 10,000 steps a day.
Yeah, you and my
This-
wife both. I do vigorous exercise, man. I do like a crazy amount of. I mean, like I said, I mean, I've ruined my body to the point of my exercise. So I've had to actually curtail that.
Yeah.
Just because I'm chasing that dopamine rush so hard in the gym. Just gotta be careful with it. But so your challenges and your so here's something, and I think we're gonna end on this. I think we're coming up. Yeah, we are. So I want to make sure we cover this because this is important for me. I think sometimes people hit this mindset when their spiritual beliefs, their religious beliefs, they have habits that don't align with them.
Yeah.
And there's this conflict that's occurring, right?
Mhm.
And I see that with a lot of younger generations, our generation, the generation before mine. I mean, a lot of the Muslim generation that just came to America and they were so overwhelmed by everything here. And then all of a sudden they wake up one day and they're like, well, how do I change? And it just seems so overwhelming.
Right.
And the guilt and that word sin, right? Which I'm not a big fan of that word at all, right?
Correct.
And this happens across all religions and all beliefs. So how does somebody like walk through that? And that's
You sure you only got a couple of minutes because you dropped the deepest question on me.
Well,
I have so much on this point.
It's funny. The neuroscientist who's on your Steve Scanlon, who's a good friend of mine, blamed me for asking the hardest question first. So I was like, I'm gonna ask him the hardest question at the end this time.
You asked a very deep question that I've dealt with from many angles, and it's very personal, obviously very personal.
Sure.
But one angle is that, we in our tradition, it's that God says, if you didn't sin, he'd replace you with people who did. Which is fascinating when you think about it, like, why? And then he goes, so they could come back and ask for repentance. So I'm like, So is sin a sin or sin a mistake? And he wants you to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah. In Hebrew, sin means missing the target.
Right.
So it's not even a mistake. It's you fell short of the goal.
Correct.
Yeah, sorry.
It's that. And then the other part of it is, like, I have a mentor who went up to me and he was like, you're afraid of success. And I was like, nah, I'm not. I'm afraid of failure. And he was like, no, you're afraid of success. And I was like, why do you say that? He goes, because you're afraid to learn. And I was like, why am I afraid to learn? I'm not afraid to learn. I'm a smart guy. And he was like, because he goes, how do you learn? I was like, how? He goes, you only learn through failure. He goes, so if you're afraid to fail, that means you're afraid to learn, which means you're afraid to succeed.
Yeah.
So I look at sin in many ways as the one who has the right intention behind it is constantly trying to learn from the sin. And if a person, why am I studying addiction? Because I'm trying to figure something out about me that I'm struggling with.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if God took me down this crazy path, like I'm looking at the text and I'm going to Stanford and I'm studying books on addiction, and maybe I'll never figure it out, but I get closer to trying to uncover this complex thing that I was predisposed to. That's part of my search of my journey. So that's another angle. But I want one last point on this. I kind of made a decision in it was 2016 or 2017 that I would not have a relationship with God based on guilt.
Okay.
Because religion is taught at a young age, it's guilt-based, all of that. And I think when you're older, you realize it's not black and white. It's not based even on the rules. It's you're doing the best you can with what you were given. And so even if I went days on doing the wrong thing, I was just like, I'm not going to have a relationship on guilt.
That's cool.
I want to have a relationship based on something else. And so I'll let myself be in a bad phase, quote unquote, from an action perspective, but my relationship with something greater is not guilt trip.
Yeah. Well, this is not a plug for MakeSpace, but this is why I love MakeSpace so much. You know what I mean? It's like I felt comfortable in there, and because it was like a new way of thinking, and it was just refreshing because it was more aligned with me. And my beliefs have always been is like not that I'm a Buddhist at all, right? But I studied a lot about Buddhism, and one of the things I love the story about Buddha when he was on his deathbed. and one of his disciples said to him, "Hey, you never taught us how to get to heaven." And supposedly his response was, "I had never intended to. I want to teach you guys how to live on the planet."
That's
And,
beautiful.
you're right, and I think that to me is the way I practice my religion.
I agree with that.
Is let me just live on this planet, and whatever happens next will take care of itself. And I think it's a great way to wrap up this new episode on in our live studio, guys. I think we ran over a little bit, but I wanted to give Farhad Chowdhury enough opportunity here. You're welcome back to our show again, by the way.
Anytime. Yeah.
You know what I mean, this is
I
a
appreciate
fascinating topic for me, as you can tell. I mean, I love this topic. I think it's so much involved that with habits that we form as salespeople, as human beings, how do we create them? And then how do we get rid of the ones we don't want anymore? So, John, take us out of here as quickly as you can before I keep talking. 'Cause I can keep talking for another 30 minutes if you let me.
45.
Looks like Tom Duncan.
Sounds like must be a duck.
Jersey girls are the best.
Yeah.
What?
The bunny ears are back.